The tires of Raghav's sedan screamed against the asphalt as he pushed the car down the treacherous, rain-slicked curves of the Shimla highway. The storm outside was relentless, violent sheets of water slamming into the windshields so hard that the wipers could barely keep up. Inside the cabin, the air felt suffocatingly heavy, thick with the sharp scent of ozone and the unmistakable, rancid smell of burnt wool. It didn't matter how high Raghav turned up the AC. The smell clung to their clothes and skin like a physical layer of ash. Meera sat rigidly in the passenger seat, her eyes wide and unblinking as she stared into the passenger side rearview mirror. She was terrified of what she might see trailing them out of the pine forest, half expecting a tidal wave of crimson thread to surge out of the dark trees and drag them back to the ruins of the Oakwood Vista Resort. Her hands shook violently against her knees. They had left everything behind. Their luggage, their laptops, their peace of mind. All that mattered was distance. Just as the distant, comforting glow of Shimla's main town began to flicker through the dense mountain fog ahead, the car's console suddenly violently vibrated. The digital screen illuminated with a harsh glare, displaying an unknown local number. Raghav flinched, his knuckles turning white on the steering wheel. He hesitated for a second before hitting the speakerphone button, desperately hoping it was a normal call, perhaps the resort management or a local emergency alert. "Hello?" he called out, his voice cracking with anxiety. There was no human response. At first, only the heavy rush of static filled the car, mimicking the sound of the rain outside. But then, the static rhythmically broke. Clack, clack, clack. It was the sharp, metallic sound of a heavy mechanical loom working at an impossible speed. Meera choked back a sob, pressing her back hard against her seat. The sound seemed to vibrate through the very chassis of the car. Over the mechanical rhythm, the static warped, twisting into a low, raspy whisper that sounded like a chorus of voices speaking in a rare, old Himachali dialect. Asterisk. A garment started must be finished. Asterisk, the voice hissed. The words weren't just loud, they carried an unnatural depth that made the windows vibrate. Before Raghav could speak, the line went dead, leaving them in a sudden, ringing silence. The digital dashboard flickered wildly, the clock digits spinning out of control before freezing completely. Raghav pressed down harder on the gas pedal, the engine roaring in protest as they raced toward the faint sanctuary of the town's electric lights, completely unaware that the first thread of the trap had already been tightly wound around them. By 3 a.m., the sedan finally rumbled into the brightly lit heart of Shimla's Mall Road. The neon signs of commercial hotels offered a stark contrast to the shadowy pine forests they had just escaped. Raghav parked haphazardly outside a modern, multi-story hotel, its lobby glowing with reassurance. The receptionist looked bewildered as the couple staggered inside, drenched from head to toe and entirely empty-handed, but he quickly processed their check-in without asking too many questions. Inside room 502, Raghav immediately slammed the heavy wooden door shut, engaging the deadbolt and chain link. He rushed to the large glass windows, pulling the thick blackout curtains tightly together until not a single sliver of the dark mountain night could peek through. The room was warm and smelled of commercial lavender, completely devoid of any rustic wood or old-world charm, which was exactly what they needed to ground themselves. "We are leaving for Delhi first thing in the morning," Raghav said, his voice a frantic whisper as he paced the carpeted floor. He rubbed his face with his hands, trying to erase the memory of the voice on the phone. "I don't care about our clothes, our laptops, or anything we left behind at Oakwood Vista. It's all replaceable. We are not going back there, Meera." "Never." Meera didn't answer. She sat frozen on the edge of the plush bed, staring blankly at her own hands. Her body was shivering, but it wasn't from the mountain cold anymore. Slowly, her fingers drifted to her left wrist to unclasp her watch. As the metal strap pulled away, her heart skipped a beat, and a cold sweat broke out across her forehead. Wrapped tightly around her wrist, hidden perfectly beneath the cuff of her heavy wool sweater, was a single, flawless loop of crimson thread. It wasn't a loose string from her jacket, nor was it tied in a traditional knot. As she leaned closer under the harsh fluorescent light of the nightstand lamp, her breath hitched. The thread was embedded directly under the top layer of her skin, resting like a perfectly straight, vibrant red vein. Panic flaring, she picked at it with her fingernail, but there was no edge to grab. It was completely beneath her flesh. Worse still, as she pressed her thumb against the crimson line, she didn't just feel her normal pulse. Beneath the thread, a distinct, rhythmic throbbing was beginning to take shape. It was slow, heavy, and perfectly synchronized with a distant, imaginary echo that only she could hear. Clack, clack, clack. She stared at Raghav, who was still pacing near the door, muttering to himself about highway routes and morning traffic. The sheer terror of what was happening paralyzing her throat. She couldn't bring herself to speak, terrified that acknowledging the red line out loud would make it tighten. Closing her eyes, she pulled her sleeve back down, concealing the mark, while the unnatural pulse beneath her skin grew steadily stronger. The harsh fluorescent light of the hotel bathroom buzzed overhead. Mira stared at her left wrist, her breath coming in shallow gasps. Beneath her skin, the crimson thread glowed with an unnatural vibrancy. It wasn't a mark on the surface, it was woven into her, mimicking a vein. Desperation clawing at her throat, she turned the tap on full blast. She grabbed a bar of soap and began to scrub, then used a rough washcloth until her skin was raw and angry. Yet, the crimson line remained entirely unaffected. Then came the true horror. When she pressed 2 fingers against the mark, she felt a distinct, rhythmic throb. Thump thump, thump thump. It was pulsing in perfect, terrifying synchronization with her own heartbeat. The thread had an alive, parasitic energy, anchoring itself to her life force. Horrified, she pulled her sleeve down. She couldn't tell Raghav yet, he was already on the verge of a breakdown. When dawn broke, the rain stopped, replaced by a mountain fog so thick it felt like a physical weight. Raghav paced the room, eyes bloodshot. "Let's go," he muttered, grabbing the keys. They hurried to the sedan, the morning air smelling faintly of damp earth and burnt wool. Raghav threw himself into the driver's seat and turned the ignition. The engine gave a pathetic, hollow click. The dashboard lights flickered feebly and died. No, no, no. Raghav slammed his palms against the steering wheel. The battery is dead. In a new car? It makes no sense. He unbuckled his seatbelt. "I saw a mechanic a block down. Stay here, lock the doors." As Raghav stepped into the fog, Mira looked out the window. Across the street, standing completely still, was an old woman wrapped in a heavy, dark shawl. While locals and tourists hurried past, she remained anchored to the spot. Slowly, the old woman raised her head. Her eyes were milky white and sightless, yet they stared directly through the fog, pinning Mira to her seat. In her wrinkled hands, she held an ancient wooden spindle. With agonizing slowness, her fingers twisted the wood, spinning a thick, impossibly bright strand of crimson wool. With every rotation of the spindle, the thread beneath Mira's skin throbbed with a sharp, burning pain, pulling her forward. Driven by a sudden, magnetic panic, Mira stepped out of the car while Raghav was distracted by the mechanic. The air felt ice cold against her face as she crossed the street, her eyes locked on the old woman. But as she drew closer, the figure turned sharply, disappearing into a narrow, shadowed alleyway. Mira followed, the pulsing in her wrist growing more intense, a frantic drumming beneath her flesh. The alley led away from the bustling market to a small, cluttered antique bookstore tucked between old stone buildings. Inside, the air smelled of dust and decaying paper. Sitting behind the counter was an elderly man with thick glasses, reading by the glow of a green banker's lamp. The old woman with the spindle was nowhere to be seen. "Can I help you, Betty?" the man asked, his voice kind but heavy. Mira hesitated, then pulled back her sleeve, exposing the taut, red line on her arm. "Do you know what this means?" It happened at the Oakwood Vista Resort. The man's expression darkened instantly. He pushed his glasses up his nose, leaning forward to inspect her wrist. "That is the Kaffin key dory, the shroud thread. You didn't just escape the weaver's estate, child. You stole a piece of her web, and now she is pulling you back." He reached behind him, pulling a dusty, handwritten ledger from a high shelf. Flipping through pages written in old Urdu and English script, he stopped at a faded newspaper clipping from 1924. Her name was Shanti, the scholar explained, his eyes filled with grim pity. She was the master weaver for a British merchant. She spent 3 years weaving a grand bridal tapestry for his daughter. But the night it was finished, the merchant locked Shanti and her workers in the cellar, setting the estate on fire to claim the insurance and steal credit for her work. Dr. Shastri tapped the yellowed newspaper clipping with a trembling finger. The black and white photograph of the charred ruins looked disturbingly identical to the skeletal remains of the estate Mira had seen just hours ago. Shanti died holding her loom, the scholar said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper that seemed to echo in the cramped shop. As the flames consumed her, she didn't scream for mercy. She chanted. Before the fire took her lungs, she cursed the very thread she spun, vowing that any celebration built on her ashes would be bound in blood. The entity you encountered isn't a mere spirit, child. It is a living malice woven into the very soil of that hill. Mira stared at the clipping, her chest tightening. But we didn't build anything. We were just guests. To her, there are no innocent guests, Dr. Shastri replied grimly. The resort was built directly over her ashes, a playground of luxury built on top of a massacre. By entering her domain, you became part of her unfinished work. The crimson thread under your skin is her anchor. He leaned closer, the green light of the banker's lamp reflecting off his thick lenses. The Kafan key dory doesn't just mark you, it claims you. It is a tether of spiritual sinew. As long as it remains embedded in your flesh, distance means nothing. You can run to Delhi, to the ends of the earth, but she will slowly wind the thread back onto her spindle, dragging your mind and body back to the cellar to finish the tapestry she started with your life. Mira looked down as a sharp, agonizing prick pierced her arm. Beneath her skin, the red line twitched, lengthening by a fraction of an inch, creeping steadily toward her elbow. How'd I get rid of? Mira pleaded, her voice cracking as she cradled her arm. To break the tether, you must destroy the source, Dr. Shastri said, his eyes urgent. The master spindle, the heart of her loom. It holds the root of the curse. You must return to the fire's origin and burn it to ash. Suddenly, the green banker's lamp flickered and died, plunging the bookstore into a suffocating gloom. The temperature dropped instantly, turning their breath into white plumes of vapor. Clack, clack, clack. The rhythmic, metallic sound echoed from the walls, vibrating through the floorboards and rattling the glass display cases. The heavy book ledgers on the shelves began to shake violently, spilling open as if caught in an invisible gale. Mira gasped, crying out in agony as a sharp, burning pain shot directly through her chest. She pulled back her sleeve. The crimson thread was no longer static, it was violently writhing, sliding further up her arm toward her elbow like a living parasite beneath her skin. The flesh around it turned a bruised, ghostly white as the thread tightened, pulling her toward the door. She knows you are here. Dr. Shastri shouted over the deafening clacking. Go, before she pulls you completely. Stumbling backward, Mira burst out of the shop and back into the narrow alleyway. The air outside was thick with the scent of ozone and burnt wool. The invisible tug at her wrist was unbearable, a physical force dragging her forward. She spilled out onto the main street, gasping for air, just as Raghav's panicked voice called out her name through the fog. Mira, where were you? Raghav ran over, grabbing her shoulders. The mechanic fixed the car, let's go. We can't go to Delhi, Raghav, Mira cried, pulling back her sleeve to show him the red line, which had now reached her bicep. Look at this. It's pulling me. If we leave Shimla, it will kill me. We have to go back to the resort. We have to destroy the spindle. Raghav stared at her arm in horror. He could see the outline of the thread shifting under her skin, tightening like a tourniquet. He realized then that their escape had been an illusion. The entity had never let them go. With no other choice, Raghav helped Mira into the passenger seat. He put the car in reverse, turned away from the highway to Delhi, and headed back toward the dark pine forests of the Oakwood Vista Resort. When they arrived at the resort, the gates were wide open, swaying creakily in the wind. The entire property was completely abandoned. The staff, the cars, the guests, all gone, as if swallowed by the mountain itself. A thick, unnatural mist clung to the ground, obscuring the swimming pool and the courtyard. Mira stepped out of the car, drawn forward by an invisible force. The pain in her arm had gone numb, replaced by a cold, heavy sensation that guided her steps directly toward the east wing, the ruins of the old weaver's estate. Raghav followed closely behind, holding a heavy iron tire iron from the trunk and a lighter. The grand glass doors of the resort shattered outward as they approached, allowing the mist to pour into the luxury lobby like smoke from an invisible fire. Guided by the pulsing under Mira's skin, they found a hidden trapdoor beneath the floorboards of the kitchen, covered in modern linoleum that had been torn open from the inside. Descending the stone steps, the smell of ash and old wool grew overpowering. The cellar was vast and blackened by ancient soot. In the center of the room sat a massive, charred wooden loom. Miraculously, it was fully intact, wrapped in thousands of glowing, crimson threads that seemed to breathe in the darkness. Sitting at the loom was the veiled figure of Shanti. Her skeletal hands moved with impossible speed. As she wove, the thread in Mira's arm pulled violently, dragging Mira toward the empty seat beside the entity. Raghav, the center wheel. The spindle, Mira screamed, her body resisting as she was forced to her knees beside the cursed machine. The veiled woman turned her head toward Raghav, her hollow eyes burning with a dull, red light. Crimson threads shot out from the walls, pinning Raghav's arms to the stone pillars, dropping the tire iron from his grip. Mira's hands were forced onto the wooden frame of the loom. The thread under her skin began to sprout outward through her fingertips, weaving itself directly into the grand, bloody tapestry before her. She could feel her life force draining into the fabric. With a final, desperate burst of strength, Raghav managed to free his right hand from the tightening threads. He couldn't reach the tire iron, but his fingers found the lighter in his pocket. He struck the flint. Instead of attacking the entity, Raghav threw the flickering lighter straight into the massive basket of raw, unspun red wool sitting at the base of the loom. The dry, ancient wool exploded into a roaring blue wall of fire. The flames spread instantly up the crimson threads, traveling like fuses toward the ceiling and the loom itself. The entity let out a final, deafening wail as the master spindle caught fire, snapping the threads holding Raghav and Mira. The red line under Mira's skin instantly turned to ash, fading away into nothingness. Raghav grabbed Mira, dragging her up the collapsing stone stairs just as the underground cellar was entirely consumed by the cleansing fire. As they stumbled out into the pouring rain of the courtyard, the grand facade of the Oakwood Vista Resort began to crumble into the valley below, finally burying the secrets of the Weaver's estate forever.